All right, so we have a signet ring that's ready to go here, and I'm going to bring our object in for projection, and let's just go back and change this to our standard brush. Now, the way that we bring in an object for projection is we bring it in as an alpha. And that means an alpha texture or an alpha matte. There is an option here for alphas, so it says alpha here. If I click on that, it'll open up a whole bunch of alphas that exist. Let's just take an example of one of these to get started. This one's pretty darn easy to see what it is. This is alpha 19, and I'm just going to hit X to turn off symmetry real quick. If I click and drag with this, you'll see that it starts dragging, as I create my stroke here, it is using that alpha as sort of a stylized version of the stroke. Kind of cool. Not what we want in this case, and certainly not what we really want anyway, because we want to be able to control the location of that alpha and scale it on the surface of the signet here. So in order to be able to do that, we would need to change the stroke type that we're working with. So I click on stroke and change to drag rect. And what this does is I get to drag out a rectangle that is essentially using that stroke, or actually using that alpha as what it's creating. Okay. And we get something like that. And you can imagine that that is, we replace that with a deer's head, and we're kind of getting a business there. Another thing that I'm noticing as I'm just working here, let me just go to having no alpha, and we'll go back to freehand. Oops, not that. Right now, let's put this back to regular focal shift of 0. Right now, you might be able to see in the video, see this little red line that's following my cursor? Okay, this is what's called lazy mouse, and it's really, really helpful, but sometimes it's not very nice either to use. This is not necessarily the default thing that ZBrush comes with when you are just starting up the software. Sometimes it remembers that you used it in the previous time you used ZBrush. So lazy mouse is a feature that can be turned on or off. If you hit L, it turns it off or on. Right now it's no longer on. What's nice about lazy mouse is that when I stop, if I'm not using lazy mouse and I stop, I kind of continue to build up the geometry from the brush. But if I am using lazy mouse, it is quite nice because it just sort of stops with me. And I often use lazy mouse, but I don't always want it. And you can see that it's a little bit more subtle in terms of the way that it is creating its deformations here than when I wasn't using it. Exact same tool, right? But I just thought it was worthwhile pointing that out in case you were wondering why what you're creating might not look exactly like what I'm creating. Cool. So let me just undo that a couple times. So alpha, back to that. Cool. So if we want to bring in our own alpha, we need to come down to import, and just one of those ZBrush things in case you're not familiar with the software. If you sort of move off of the menu that pops up, it goes away. Kind of annoying, I agree, but that's how it works. So we're just going to click on import here. I'm going to find my deer alpha. There it is. What is white in this image obviously is going to be what's pulled up, and what is black is going to be what's left behind. And that didn't seem to import, so let me just see here. Yeah, pink should be fine. Show. That's interesting. Let me just go back into this image real quick and make one change. Let's open up Photoshop. Shouldn't be a problem with it being in grayscale, but let me just change that to RGB, right? And I'll save that again. Okay, I will save you as a new copy. RGB. B. Okay, see if that's the source of the problem that I'm seeing right now. Let's try that again. Alpha, import, that one. Very strange. Let's just try one other thing. Let's just try saving it as like a JPEG. Don't know why it's giving me this error. I don't like saving as JPEGs usually because it does create some compression artifacts, but not sure why I'm getting the error that I'm getting at the moment. So in the sake of trying to get the tutorial done, this is a, let's go to JPEGs because I can't tell which is which. Okay, that one brought it in. Maybe it was just an issue with the PNG format for whatever reason. So, Dear Alpha, there it is. That's loaded in. Again, if I was to just draw here, it's using the Dear Alpha as the stroke. So I'm just going to go and change this to drag rect. If I click and drag out now, I get my Dear Alpha, which is that, right? Now, I like to click and drag downwards, so it's a little bit strange to have to drag upwards. That's okay though. The point is, you need to kind of find a good location to start from. Now, basically, that is fairly centered. It's a little bit off center, but it's fairly centered, and it's down a little bit too low. So I'm just going to keep dragging back down until I get to where I started from. And I'll undo that. I'm going to move up here a little bit more, click and drag. And it all kind of depends on where you want to put this thing in here. So let's just say it's pretty close to where I want it. Undo. Let's move it over to the right a little bit. There we go. Holding down Shift while I do it will snap it to be on just a single axis. And there we go. Let go. Now, the intensity of the brush at the time that I created this thing will dictate how far off the surface it goes or how far in it goes. And ultimately, depending on what you want to achieve with this thing, if you are looking to cut it in, you would want to hold down Alt while you drag it out. That will cut in instead. But also notice that if you are trying to cut in, it sort of flips the image, which is maybe not ideal. So in order to counteract that problem, we'll need to come up to alpha, and we're going to change the orientation here. So we'll flip horizontal. Flip H is flip horizontal. And now that better matches what we're trying to achieve. I'll go through this issue again where I was trying to figure out where to draw from. How about that? That's good enough. All right. And that might be deep enough as well. I do like to make sure that on the back side, for instance, this is not too deep or cutting through or doing weird things to the back side, which, as you can see, it is. All right. So yet another little gotcha in ZBrush. I think I'm starting to understand why people might not like this if they're not familiar with the software. Because there's a lot of these little things that you're like, wow, I don't know how to fix that. Well, this is actually not too bad of one. This has to do with backface masking. So I don't want this, the effect of this to kind of flow all the way through into this face back here and any of these back faces. So what I can do is come in here and go to Brush and come down to Modifiers. Not Modifiers, sorry, wrong one. Auto Masking. And I'm going to turn on Backface Masking. I'll just leave it as its default settings. So now if I click and drag and just take a look and see if that's doing what I want it to do. Right, now we're not getting anything coming through the backside there, so that's good. That's a pretty important thing, actually, backface masking here in ZBrush, and we're going to use that as we continue on with our brush as well. All right, so I think this is probably a good place to also create a new version of our Signet, so we'll call this Signet _01. All right, and it's a little bit difficult to draw on the screen and see my image at the same time, but I am going to go ahead and open up a copy of this so that I'm just going to push it off to the side here so I can better see what I'm doing. And I'm going to have to kind of think in reverse in terms of, you know, what I'm pushing in and what I'm pulling out, because what I see here is a relief that is pulled out, and I'm actually creating one that's pushed in. So it's slightly different. But here's how I would begin. I work in larger shapes, and then I work my way down to smaller shapes. So ultimately, I would probably want to come in here and turn off the alpha first. So I'd go to alpha off. I'll change my stroke back to something like freehand, and I will go in, and I think that for the purposes of this example, I might just stick with the standard brush, to be completely honest. And let's just make sure that backface masking is still on. It is. Good. If you switch between brushes, however, each brush has its own settings, so you'd want to turn backface masking on for any other brush that you work with. So I'm just going to come up here, and I'm just going to work at sort of a low intensity to begin with, and I'm going to hold down Alt while I draw so that I'm actually pushing in. I'm going to turn off lazy mouse as well, and I'm just going to kind of push in here a little bit. Not too worried about being 100% precise. And the other thing that I'm going to do as I work in here is just kind of smooth around these edges. Maybe not such a large intensity though. Might use lazy mouse while I do that though. Smooth around these edges so that this transition is a little bit more gradual. Now this is the thing too, is that you can easily get caught where you have basically lost any free space in your window to move your object around. In this case, for instance, the geometry is taking up all of the screen, and I can't just click and Alt drag and pan around anymore. So if that's the situation, you do have these tools over here on the side where you can just grab the Move tool or Scale tool or Rotate tool here and just use those instead. So that's kind of your safety. And I think that kind of gets started there. I might switch to the clay tool just because I'm kind of familiar with it. Again, brush, backface masking, there we go. And it's a little bit intense there at the moment. Yeah, I kind of like that better. So this is a kind of a between building and subtracting here. Again, I worked with a fairly large brush to just kind of start in some basic detail. If you don't want to affect what's on the outside, and if you just kind of want to protect that, I might just draw a mask up to the edges more or less. Holding down Control to do this. It's up to you. Right? I'm probably not going to be worried about it too much, but just to show you that this prevents you from having to worry too much about those transitions. I can add a lot in here without it overflowing. My recommendation is to not get too caught up in any one area for too long. Just kind of like if you were drawing with a pencil, you want to develop the whole figure kind of at the same level throughout the entire drawing. Same degree everywhere, and you gradually keep working up areas. If you get too caught up in one area, then you can easily add in too much detail or kind of lose sight of the bigger picture. Some people might think I'm being way too pedantic here, but this is my workflow, and it doesn't really fail me. So depends on how much time you have as well. If you have a really fast job, well, you kind of think how large is the how large is the object that I'm working on? How much of that detail is actually going to come through in the ring when it's, you know, when it's 3D printed or when it's cast? Because ultimately you do lose a lot of detail. But I have noticed too that, you know, we in our workflow at nzjewelleryonline.com, we have our own 3D printer that goes down to about 25 microns. So we're able to preserve a tremendous amount of detail. And if we don't include that detail in, you know, ZBrush, or we leave something that's a little bit rough, then that will actually be apparent in both the 3D print and then the casting too. So, you know, there's that as well. Oops. What I just did there by accident was I Control-clicked instead of just dragged on the mask, and the effect of that is that it softens the mask. So I undid that because I didn't want that to happen. That's a little bit too much there. Again, I might just trim that off a bit. There are some brushes that exist, custom brushes, that make this job a lot easier, wherever there's kind of this gap, where there's a big edge like this, you can create a mask that will just go right up to the edge, but it won't dip down below it. So I'm not going to go into those yet, though, because that would be really asking too much of somebody who's new with ZBrush to go in and install and find all that stuff. But ZBrush is a very customizable software, and all those sorts of things do exist for the person who wants to, you know, start extending what they can do with it. So, good enough. There we go. Close enough. All right, so just sort of what I was doing was kind of coming out to the edges here, pulling them in a bit, soften that out, soften this out. This is probably not going to be perfectly even, but ultimately, I don't like things to be perfectly even because then it starts looking really mechanical. I like things to have sort of an organicness to them, like they were actually made by hand. I'll pull my intensity down again. And I'm going to increase the intensity of my smooth at the moment. Sometimes it's a little hard to see what you're doing with this red wax, and I like changing that. So this default material is this red wax material. If I click on material, I can change this. I like matte cap gray quite a bit, but when I'm working on something that's going to be shiny in the end, I do sometimes like to just change that to like metal 01 here, because that gives me some specular highlights. Now I can kind of see what I'm doing there a little bit better. Let's go through the rest of it up here. The head region is a little bit interesting on this guy. I'm really having to kind of think in reverse here in terms of how this would be constructed. Sort of it's a bit of a mind game for me. Anything that would be relieved is now being pushed in, so pull that back there. Right, it's going to block in some areas here. just very rough, rough and gentle. You know, I don't want to get too caught up in detail. There we go. And so a mouth that comes out here, right, and a nose right there, and let's see, let's block in some other detail up here too. I'll turn on lazy mouse to help. Actually, I'll increase the intensity here quite a bit. So this just comes down straight into the eye. Something like that. And the other ones are kind of similar. Right. Now if you want this obviously going the opposite way, it would be a heck of a lot easier where it's coming out instead of being pushed in, because you don't have to think in reverse. This is one of those instances where somebody was mentioning using dam standard, and if I use dam standard here on this side, here's what I'll get. I don't have my lazy mouse, huh? Let's use lazy mouse. Or do I? I think maybe I did. Yeah, okay, I do. So it's dam standard's kind of a little bit more intense of a brush than I typically would like to use at this stage. But you could use it, right? I don't really like it as much. So I'm going to go back to my clay brush. Like that. Connects up there. And oops, not that. I think I've not been pushing in there. I've been not holding down Alt while I was doing this. We will get this eventually. There we go. There, and right. So I think right now is probably a good time to simply stop the video, because I've blocked in the major detail, and from here on I can just do it's kind of a running pass at the remainder of the detail. So I'll stop here and then I'll try to finish this off in the next video.